Thank you very much for having me at the AABBA meeting. I'm glad to be able to present at least virtually, although I would be much happier to be actually in Vienna, and I hope I can come to one of the future meetings. Maybe I can connect the AABBA trip with another trip, and then it makes it easier to come from the US to Europe. My first thought presenting was to talk about my new precedence effect model that uses the BICAM algorithm, but I think some of you have heard this talk already and it's also available on YouTube. So I thought about talking an actually older model that we developed in 2013 to resolve front-back confusions by via head movements. And with a little extension, you can show that this model can also be used to judge elevation by looking at the acoustic parallax. So the whole idea for this model really started from Parrott and Noble's paper on the benefit of front-back discrimination through head movements. And you can see in the left graph that when the person is motionless, that the front-back confusion errors are about 30% and they become very small, less than 1% or around 1% if they have natural movement, meaning they can move the head any way they want, or if the subjects are told to rotate their heads. So that led us to the idea of having a model that has an internal coordinate system and then has an external coordinate system. So the room-related coordinate system, that's alpha r. That's basically the one that stays with the room, and the head-related coordinate system, alpha h, that's the one we typically use in binaural hearing, and that's also in Jens' book. And then we have the head position angle, alpha m. So what we do now is we basically take our model, and when we rotate the head, we keep the room-related coordinate system constant and rotate the binaural activity maps with it. So that's basically the basic elevation model, very standard left ear input, right ear input. We have HRTFs that are convolved with. We need to make sure that when we have virtual sound sources that we always get the correct HRTF in the head-related coordinate system. So if I move my head, the HRTFs shift with the sound source. That's constant in the room. We simulate the basilar membrane with the gamma tone filter bank. That's the module BM. We do that. We have the hair cell model. In this case, I think it's just a low-pass filter. We do the ILD and ITD analysis. I'm just going to show the ITD analysis. And then on top, which is really important, comes the remapping function. So we start to correlate the output of the cross-correlation model with the head movement, and then we do binaural activity pattern analysis and show the binaural activity pattern. Jens would say it's the binaural activity map because we didn't really recognize a pattern yet. So important here is the remapping function. So we take a normalized cross-correlation function, as you see in the equation on the right. We get the output if we in the left graph. That's the one that's labeled ITD versus relative amplitude. We had to shift it by or rotate it by 90 degrees so we can show the effect. And now we have a remapping function that we extract from the measured HRTFs. Really important is that in this case, we do that for a horizontal plane, but subsequently, when we talk about elevation, we do that for all different elevation angles. And so this function, of course, has then the output ITD and the input at azimuth, and usually we have two ITD values that are identical for two different azimuth because of the cone of confusion. And what we do now is, when the model shifts virtually the head with the angle alpha m, we counter-rotate this remapping function. And as the output, then we get a function of cross-correlation output as a function of azimuth. So we have two peaks, one for the front and one for the back direction. The only position we wouldn't have it is a 90 and 270 degree when the head fully turns to the left and the right, then those two peaks merge into one. So the model steps, just to go through it step by step. The first case is we determine the head movement angle based on a predetermined trajectory. In our case, we're just going to move it from 0 degree to 45 degree for the elevation modulator. We then select the HRTFs that correspond to the sound source angle for the head-related coordinate system for each step that we do. We compute the integral cost correlation function for each frequency versus the ITD. Convert this cost correlation function in a function of head-related azimuths using the remapping function I just showed you. Then we're going to circular shift the remapping function based on the head movement angle by minus alpha m, so we compensate for the head movement, and then we compute the mean ICC output over our frequency bands. Then we average the ICC output over time and estimate the position of the auditory band at the azimuth where the ICC peak has its maximum. So this is the case. So you see here our cross correlation function azimuth, and on the y-axis we have the head movement over time in slices. And you see that if you plot everything in the beginning, when we have no information about the head movement, we have two peaks, and as we kind of average over this whole turn, the rear peak smears out, and in this case the front peak, the sound source is presented from the front, is stable. For all the whole paper, the sound source is always a Gaussian noise, but it also works with other sound sources. So if you look at the output, we see on the top graph we have three graphs. The one for the initial pattern, that's the one with the dashed line. You see two peaks. The sound source presented at 30 degrees. You have one peak there, but you also have one peak at 150 degrees at the corresponding back position based on the cone of confusion. At the end position, which is the gray solid line, you also have two peaks, but those two peaks are at different positions. Because we compensated for the head movement, the one at the rear position, which in this case is the true position, is stable. The other one is a very different position. And if we average over those functions over the whole head to turn relation, not just those two graphs, then we find that the main peak is stabilized, the other peak washes out, shown here by the solid black line. In the 2013 paper, we also looked at how much do we have to move the head, and looking at the error in percent. If you want to see the details, it's in the Springer Handbook paper, and you see that at 0 degree we have around 30% of error, which is similar to what Parrott and Noble found. But then if you have a head movement even 10-15 degrees, it goes down to a degree very soon, and it reaches the 1 degree error by about 20 degrees. So now the question is, can we use this also to show elevation? And that of course goes back to an idea by Wallach in the 1940s. He already proposed that maybe we can judge elevation through acoustic parallax and head turning, but there was no functional model, and that's what we're trying to do with this model. So all we're going to do is we're going to take the model and we're going to build 16 parallel instances of it, each tuned to a different elevation, and the tuning happens by using the remapping function that was collected from the head-related transfer functions at this elevation. So the catalog, I think it's an old catalog that was still measured in Bochum with a dummy head, and that has measured elevations in steps of 10 degrees. All we're going to do is we're going to take the output and we plot it into one graph. So the graph that I'm going to show next is just a color plot, and due to the acoustic parallax we'll see that the correct elevation will prevail. So this is the first case, 0 degree elevation, 0 degree azimuth. In the first case, we don't have head movement compensation, and you see, as you would observe, we're very bad, or the model is not good at judging localization because it doesn't look at spectral cues at all. It's a simple binaural model, so basically it identifies possible locations in the medium plane throughout. The whole medium plane is white, so that's a high activity there. With the head movement, and that's on the right side, you see that it narrowed down, and this is a 45 degree shift, and you see that the true location, both in elevation and azimuth, is prevailed, and also the peak in the rear is washed out. I'm going to show you two more. Here 60 degree, 30 degree. Against the 60 degree you do a little bit better, but there are a number of multiple positions that the model indicates around the cone of confusion. On the right side with head movement narrows it nicely down to the true location, 60 degree elevation, 30 degree azimuth. the last example, minus 40 degree elevation, minus 135 degree azimuth, the same thing, cone of confusion, multiple peaks, you do some head movement and you narrow it down to the true location. This model just shows the output for the 0 degree azimuth data. Source is 0 degree azimuth, 0 degree elevation, and we see here in the beginning of the head movement we have multiple positions, and as the model moves it narrows it down pretty quickly to the true location, and at the end it also resolves the 0 and the minus 20 degree elevation. So I'm going to first show the video without the head movement compensations. It doesn't give you better information, it just fluctuates. And in the second example, which I'm going to show now, with the head movement, you'll see that as the model moves, it narrows down and becomes more focused. So this, of course, is just the beginning for the Chicago paper. We hope to simulate some actually psychoacoustic studies, including some experiments that a former student of mine, Anthony Parks, did for his PhD thesis. And then see, my guess is that the model performs better than human performance, especially if you take narrowband sound, and that you have to introduce some internal noise. But what I showed today is the model transforms spinal activity maps from head-related into room-related coordinate system, and that way it can resolve front-back confusions and estimate elevation through head movements. Thank you very much for hanging out to the end. I hope we'll see some of you at the ASA meeting in Chicago, where Jens and I will present an extended talk on this topic. And I will also be at the AES convention in New York later this year.